Hey everybody, I'm Den Haring. My channel is Fish Den 365 and welcome back to our Tuesday series, Topwater Tuesday. Today, our Topwater Tuesday bait is the Zoom Super Fluke, and you're going to want to stay tuned to this one because you may learn some rigging that you've never seen before that is incredibly effective with the Zoom Super Fluke. Okay, you might be thinking, well, this is a soft plastic swim bait. How in the world is it a topwater lure? Well, there are ways to rig this bait that turn it into a topwater lure, and it's one of the more effective ways to fish, in my opinion, to fish the Zoom Super Fluke. So the standard rigging for a Zoom Super Fluke is generally to take a EWG type hook. Some people like to use these heavier beast type hooks with the thicker wire because it adds weight. This one has a little spring lock item where you just poke it into the nose of the bait, twist it in, and then you can do your old Texas rig with the fluke. Well, when you're fishing it for topwater, the first thing is you don't want to use such a heavy hook. So don't use that hook. It's better to have a standard 3 or 4/0 EWG. This is a Gamakatsu EWG. And the way you want to rig it for topwater is different than if you want the bait to go nose down. We want the bait to plane more level. Like, come on, Brainy, get your tail out of the way. So we want the bait to come through the water more like this than like this. And so there's a way to rig it to make it do that. And the way you do that is you put your hook through the nose of the bait. And the fluke has a belly, that's open, so you can get a better hook set. So what you want to do is put your hook point into the nose of the bait, and generally you come out about a 1/4 inch, but this one you want to actually go through the thick part of the nose and come out where the belly slot is, all the way out here, all the way down here. And then you'd have your line tied onto the eye of the hook. You'd come all the way down and then come out. You'd actually have the line tie buried into the nose of the bait. The hook would come all the way out down here, and the hook would be further down the bait, like you see like this. I won't rig it through the back for now, but you get the idea. The further back on the bait it is, the more the bait planes. And so when you work the bait, it tends to come up to the surface. So the further back you set that hook, the more the bait planes out flat. And when you do your walk the dog type of retrieve, it's going to want to come upward and even pop out of the surface. And so that's one of the retrieves that you do with this bait, is you work it extremely fast, skipping it along the surface. If you ever saw a bait fish while you're fishing, most people have seen this. You might see a little bait fish being chased by a bass or some other predator fish, and the thing is, literally skipping out of the water trying to get out of the way. You can do that with the fluke. You can make your fluke look like that, and then when you stop it, it just pauses and then it just sinks really slow. And if you twitch it once or twice, it just looks like it's injured. And then you can bring it right back to the surface and do that retrieve all over again. And so that's how it becomes a topwater lure. So this is one way. I'll rig the bait this way if there's a lot of cover that I have to get through, a lot of weeds and that kind of thing. But I have a better way to make it a topwater lure, a way that I like more for when I'm fishing water that's open enough for me to get away with it. And usually that's most conditions. I'd say I fish it this way more often than even Texas rigging, because the way I fish the bait, it's a smaller hook. It comes through sparse cover really well. And so it's easier to fish as a topwater. So let me show you that, because that's something that you may not have seen before, especially in the way that I'm going to present it to you. So what you would do is you would get a fluke. Oh, and by the way, I like the Super Fluke for this style of fishing, topwater fishing. There's a ton of fluke baits out there, right? But a lot of them are made heavier. This one here is a young Houdini shad. It's heavier than the fluke, and so it's better for getting down deeper. But we're talking topwater, so in that particular case, it's not better. Here's one that's made by Yamamoto, another bait heavily impregnated with salt, heavier, wants to sink more, better for getting down to deeper fish. But again, this is Topwater Tuesday, And if you want to throw a fluke style bait as a topwater, I think the fluke is actually the best bait for it because it is a little bit lighter and it comes up to the surface very easily. So the first thing to do when you want to, with this interesting rig that I'm going to show you here, is you want to get one of these little screw locks. And these are available at your tackle store. It's the same thing that it was on the end of this hook that I showed you in the beginning of the video. You can see the little screw lock there. This is a smaller one, but you get the idea. And so what you would do is you'd grab your fluke and you'd screw that screw lock in there. So you poke it into just straight into the nose of the bait, and you just twist it in, and you just go straight in as best you can, and you just keep twisting until the entire thing is in the bait. And you want to make it so that the last turn you make, that the opening for that screw lock is horizontal. So that the opening is horizontal. And the reason for that is we're going to go ahead and get a small hook like you see here, and we're going to go right up through, we're going to go into the plastic and through that little opening on the screw eye, and here's the rig. And so now you've got a lighter hook. It still is heavy enough to throw this bait on a bait caster. I throw it on a bait cast fluke type rod. I do one other thing if I can get away with it, there's not a lot of weeds. I use a snap. Instead of tying directly to the hook, I use a snap. Why do I do that? Well, because even though that adds a little weight to it, when I'm retrieving this thing, it tends to make the fluke swing more freely. It still dances and does its darting motion, but it'll also swing and work a little bit differently. And I'll explain that in a couple of the retrieves that I talk about next. But this is the rig. Now, it's not going to come out of here because I went through the plastic of the nose and through the eye of that screw lock, which is, I'll show that to you here. It's very small. Hopefully you can see the eye of that screw lock there. So the hook goes through the plastic, through the eye. That locks it in place. So it can't go anywhere. It's stuck on there. You can't pull it out unless you rip the bait apart. And so now you've got something where you can chuck it out there, not worry about the bait falling off the hook or anything like that. If I didn't use that screw lock and just put the hook through the nose of the bait, well, eventually it would tear out of the bait and come off. And if a fish grabs it, it's even more likely to happen. But this, you can get multiple usage out of the bait. And so it makes it a really nice a way to throw this. And it's very, very easy to keep this up on the surface because it's a smaller hook. And you can just do a couple of things. You can walk the dog with it while you're retrieving quite fast, and it'll skip and jump out just like we talked about with that other rigging. But there's another neat thing that happens with this, and you can do this with the standard Texas rig as well, although I think it works better with this method. In fact, I know it does. And that is to just reel it fast on the surface so that it makes a wake. It actually wakes on the surface, and every now and then, because you got this snap on here, if you stop your reel as you're reeling, stop it, and then go again real quick, or just hit the rod, just jerk the rod once, it'll make the bait do that hunting thing where it's coming at you and all of a sudden it goes this way, but it comes back to center, and then it comes this way. And all the while it's on the surface making a wake. And it's very unique. It's different than fishing at Texas rig, but it adds a new dimension to fishing this as a topwater lure. And it works quite well. And then anytime you kill the bait, let's say you're doing that, swimming along the surface, and then you decide to kill it, well, then it just falls very, very slowly down. And then if you jerk it once or twice, it'll act like it's an injured bait fish, and it just works very well in catching these fish. Now, because the fluke has some weight to it, I like to throw it on a standard bait casting rig like this. I'll use braid, and then I'll use monofilament leader, usually about 2 rod lengths of monofilament leader. And in this particular case, I've got pretty heavy leader, 17-pound test. But the bait works still very well, and I can throw it a good way, even with this smaller hook with 17 leader. Now, the reason why I use mono is that it floats. 17-pound test, I can catch a big fish on that. I could really, get something very large and not worry about it breaking my line. and it helps me keep the bait on the surface a little bit better. So I like that. But there's another way you can rig this, and that is you can go to lighter line. You can go to 20 or 10 pound braid and maybe 10 pound or 8 pound test mono. And if you do that, you'll get a little more action out of the bait, especially when it's under the water. And then you could also use a spinning rod for that and throw one of these smaller flukes. You know, this is a Zoom Super Fluke, but this one here is a small fluke. This, and rigging it the same way, nose rigging it, this is a really good bait on certain waters, very clear water, super clear, super pressured waters, great fish catcher. In rivers, unbelievably good in rivers. And again, you could fish this as a top water or under the water. Again, with that nose hook method. I have a video about smallmouth fishing in the Delaware River, nose hooking these things. I'll put that up here so that you can watch that video in case you're interested. It's when I first really started fishing it that way. And boy, you know, you might be thinking, well, you know, do they ever miss the bait? Do they not get hooked up? And you'll find, strangely enough, when they're going after this bait this way, they usually attack the head. And so I hardly ever not hook the fish when I'm using this method for fluke fishing. Very rarely do they, if they're grabbing the tails, and they don't really quite want it, but most of the time they go to the head and they get that open hook right in their mouth. So it's kind of nice, a nice way to fish the fluke. I think what happens sometimes when you Texas rig it, sometimes they'll eat the tail of the bait, but more often I think they just mouth it and let go, and you never really get a good chance to get that hook in. But if they mouth it with that open hook, well, they're going to get hooked right away because that hook is open and ready to go and ready to hook the fish. So it's a really good way to rig the fluke, especially when you're doing topwater. But again, you can downsize this thing using that same technique for maybe river fishing or very, very pressured, very, very clear waters. Another great way to rig the fluke. So what are some of my favorite colors when it comes to fishing a fluke on the surface? I like white. This is a good all-around color. If I'm fishing very clear water, I like this pattern of fluke. I forget the name of it. I'll put it in the description of the video. But it's a standard shad bait fish type profile. Where I come from, it looks like an alewife. I might put black dots, paint a black dot on either side of this to make it look more like an alewife. And that's another good color for me. This one's called Baby Bass. I like this color a lot, especially in shallow water environments in the Pocono Lakes. This one does quite well there. And those three colors are my primary colors. I don't have a lot of other colors that I play with. There's a couple others that, like an Arkansas Shiner, that can do well, that kind of color. But these are the basic ones. You don't need a whole lot of different colors for fluke fishing. At least I don't feel you do. You get a couple of those basic colors, something that looks like a bait fish, something that looks like a perch, bluegill, or a baby bass, and you're covered. And if you want, you could always make something like this look like a perch, right? You can put some bars on it, paint some black bars and put a little orange on the belly, and now all of a sudden this baby bass color looks like a perch. And I've done that already, especially in perch, environments where I know they're feeding on perch, and it does make a difference. It can, not always, but sometimes it can make a big difference. So you just have to be aware of that kind of thing. So again, the retrieves, you want to have it skipping along the surface, skip all along the surface, and then stop, making it act very crazy and erratic and very fast, and then stop, and then go fast again, and then stop, and then maybe a few jerks underwater. That's one of the standard retrieves. And then another big one is just reeling it steady so that it's making a wake on the surface. And when you hook it this way, it doesn't only make a wake, it has this little wiggle and wobble to it, and every now and then it'll kick out to the left or right. And oftentimes when it kicks out like that, that's a trigger. Fish are following, that happens, that triggers the fish, and they just jump all over it. And it's a fun way to fish the fluke. What better way to fish it? Fishing a fluke is fun to begin with, but what better way to fish it than throwing it as a topwater? So I encourage you to try that. We're coming into a time of year now where this is going to start to get good. Right now we're in pre-spawn. It's early April, and so it's probably not the best time to throw this in the waters that I fish, where the water temperatures are right now. I think they're still in the high 40s, and they'll be approaching low 50s. But right before spawn and then right after the spawn, post-spawn, this is one of the best things you can throw. It's a really good bait, and throwing it on the top like that can be good. Good in the summer as well. early morning, evening time, and then again in the fall, all day long in the fall. These baits can be very, very good under the right conditions. I encourage you to give it a try. I hope you liked the video. If you did, give me that thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel when you do. Ring the bell. That'll give you notification for when the next video is available. Man, I can't wait to get out to fish. You know, I was going to go out this weekend, and I ended up having to work on Saturday. I burned myself out at work. We're in the process of moving to a new plant, and I just didn't have the energy. I was going to fish a tournament on Sunday, and I just didn't get a chance to do it with just being burned out from work. But dying to get out there. Sooner or later, I'm going to be going. When I do, I'll take you along with me. We'll do some bass fishing, see how things are shaking. We're certified bassified. As always, this channel is about the art and science of fishing, especially bass fishing. Tell your friends about the channel if you would. I'd appreciate it. That'll get more people and more interest, more people that show an interest in the channel by using the like button and by subscribing. The more my videos get in front of other people, and I can grow my subscribership that way, and that's what I'm looking to do. I'd like to enlarge in the community, and give me your fluke fishing tips in the comments. And if you fish it as a topwater, let me know what you do and how you do it. As always, may God bless your fishing endeavors.